lecture. All right, so again, we're talking about here, how do we know whether our strategies are successful or not? And if you recall chapter 8, we came up with this way of evaluating whether the strategy is good or not. And we can use this slide to help us determine in our assignments in the section where we are critiquing the current strategy. These are the basic elements. We look at how appropriate it is, given your skills, given your client firm's competencies rather, and then seeing if it's desirable, does it give the actual expected return, and then also whether it is doable or feasible, okay? Now, today's lecture about control and determining success is really centered around whether this strategy is desirable and whether it's actually accomplishing the level of return that's being expected. So we go back to that slide. So how would you measure success of a strategy? Given, of course, the broad measures, which is feasibility, desirability, and appropriateness. But then if a strategy has been is under implementation and it's ongoing, it's like in the case of Google, I think Van Din was asking about Google, and Google actually has a subsidiary called Waymo. Okay, so I was saying that your client is Google, or actually the new name of Google is Alphabet. And the client is Alphabet, but if you think about it, Waymo as a subsidiary is part of their strategy. Okay, so that is an action, an action that is based on an overall strategy for Alphabet. But then how would you determine whether Waymo is actually succeeding or not? Any ideas? When you're measuring success of a strategy, you should look at that. You should look at what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. And what are these measures that you could use to measure success? By the way, I've got a little note here, which you can read. I may probably show that to you. Okay, so by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but I do make some notes on the PowerPoint slides. For example, here, if you can see this, I put some notes down here, which explains the slide. Now, I really would, when you're reviewing, you should be reading these notes because it sort of explains what the slide's all about. So it says here, performance of the company is typically evaluated by financial ratios and other quantitative measures. We argue, however, that this is inadequate. So you should look at the holistic perspective. In other words, the stakeholder perspective is usually a good approach because you're not just looking at the owners, but you're also looking at customers and you're also looking at your employees. Knowing that if your employees are very satisfied and you look at do a survey and your employees are very enthusiastic, they love the company, they love working, they put in a lot of work. Is that a lead or a lag indicator? Yes, because it indicates that they'll continue to do well, they'll continue to put in a lot of effort, and most likely gives you an idea that if you're profiting now and your financial returns are very good and the employees are doing well and the customers are very satisfied, you're more assured that performance measure, profit, in other words, financial returns, will continue to do well in the future. Correct? So you're considering several aspects of success rather than just one aspect. Okay. Another thing talk about here is this one, where what matters is growth in strength, not growth in size alone. So in other words, if somebody says to you that, we're successful because we're growing, and usually when you say grow, we're growing in sales, we're growing in profits. But this slide is arguing it's more than just growth in revenue and sales, but we're also growing in understanding. We're growing in our innovation. We're growing in our learning so that we can actually use that to continue our growth. So in other words, it's the strength that we're looking at. We're looking at our capabilities and our competencies and seeing whether we are growing in that regard. And if our competencies are improving, that usually is a good sign that we can use these competencies into the future. Okay, so let's have a look at this slide now. And explains, okay, when you look at this diamond here, you can split it down the middle, okay, the vertical axis. Let's just come back, excuse me. Anyway, so we can divide this diamond into two. The right side is failure, okay, and the left side is success. So what really matters is not so much whether you are failing, but really whether you're failing and not understanding why you are failing. So if you don't understand why you're failing, that is the ultimate disaster. I think that's what this slide is saying. Because if you divide this diamond in a horizontal line, and you have, you know, the things at the bottom, what this is saying is that yes, you failed, but not only did you fail, but you failed to understand why you failed. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if you're successful, it's also pretty stupid if you're successful and you do not know why you were successful. You get the point? Because if you're successful and you don't know why, then you can't repeat that success. So if you look at the topmost part of this diamond, it shows you that you're successful is you understand why you're successful, and you can use this understanding to, you know, further improve your firm into the future. But if you're successful and you don't know why, you're taking it for granted, your success will fade away. That's what this thing is saying. The worst, of course, is if you're a failure and you don't know why you're a failure. That failure will continue to go on. That'll be what we call a rapid decline. Do you guys understand this? Does it make sense? It does, doesn't it? I think what it just is saying is the most important point is that you're understanding the reasons why you're a success and what the reasons why you are failing. Okay. All right. So the next slide is about efficiency and effectiveness. Now, this is a really popular discussion, and we might as well get into it. I'm sure in your introduction to management, you guys encountered this question: what do you mean by efficiency versus what do you mean by effectiveness? Can you guys? So that's an outcome. If I have achieved a market share of 60%, I'm effective. But does that mean I'm efficient? Especially if I spent so much money that I'm now bankrupt. If I spend so much money to reach my goal, I have 100% market share, but no money left in the bank. Is that being efficient? I think I'm answering my own question, isn't it, Heshna? The strategies will actually get you the outcomes you desire. Now, being efficient means you're doing the right things the right way. So doing things right is being efficient. Okay, so my analogy here is you choose a really good strategy. And in fact, when you use that strategy, you get the outcomes that you want. you could argue that you are being effective. Okay, you have chosen the right strategy. You have chosen to do the right things. But the other way to look at it is, if you are choosing the right things and you're doing it correctly, you're implementing it correctly, then that is being efficient because you're doing things right. Okay. Now, this slide here actually shows you that in order for your strategy to be successful, it's got to be effective and it's got to be efficient. So what happens if you're efficient and you're effective is you have growth and prosperity. Now, if your strategy is ineffective and inefficient, that's a collapse. That's the worst disaster you can possibly imagine. But then your strategy may also be ineffective. You've chosen the wrong strategy, but you implemented the strategy very well, but it's the wrong thing. For example, you might decide GE should go into automobiles, right? That could be a strategy that you think is correct. But then even if you efficiently do it correctly, like you are able to do it at low cost, but then you're not getting any market share from that, then that's an example of you being ineffective. Although you are efficient, you have consumed the least amount of resources. In which case you will go into what we call a gradual decline. Because you, to start with, you didn't choose the right strategy. The last quadrant, of course, is effective and inefficient. You've chosen the right strategy, but you're not implementing it properly, then you're being inefficient. Okay, and in which case you will gain survival. You will survive, but you're not going to thrive. Okay. Maybe you overspent on doing it. Okay. So in a nutshell, efficiency is all about how much resources are you putting in. If you, the least amount of resources that you put in, you're being efficient. Being effective is you're accomplishing the goal. Okay, so to be a successful strategy, you have to accomplish the goal and you do it with the least amount of resources. I've got an explanation, by the way, again. Let me go back to that. Oops. I've lost it. So as I've indicated here, efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. So being effective is choosing the right strategy. If you have the right strategy, but you don't implement properly, then this is being inefficient. Okay, so going back to this, what should we measure? So there are different points of view here. They don't necessarily, they're not necessarily consistent. Peter Drucker said, he's a famous management guru, if you can measure it, you can manage it. What he's saying is measure, 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 because if you're not measuring it, then you're not actually able to manage it. So that's a good point from Drucker. Then Albert Einstein was saying, not everything that can be counted counts, but not everything that counts can be counted. So I think what he's trying to say here is there are some important things that we need to have, but no statistics can actually tell us how well we're doing in these particular important things. Okay, so maybe the question really is, yes, we can count the number of deaths, but is that more important than, say, the economy, that we prevent people from starving? Would that not be the more important count to be counting? Those are the questions that we can ask ourselves. Jack Welch, famous CEO of GE, former CEO, he's he likes to simplify it. just three basic things that he likes to look at. Number one, are you satisfying your customer? Number two, are you satisfying your employee? And number three, what's the cash flow? Okay, so cash flow, it's not even profit here he's looking at. He's looking at cash flow. Because if you're an accountant, you'll know that your cash flow could be very positive, even if your profit is not that much. Any accountants in the group who can argue with me? Probably not worth arguing about. But anyway, cash flow, what he's saying there is it's about return on cash return on your investment. So very simplified look at measures, but in a way it's quite balanced because he's looking at customer, he's looking at the stakeholders like his shareholders, but also his employees as well. So I guess what the book is saying is we should have a holistic model. What do you mean by the word holistic? Holistic. Amelia, you with us, Amelia? I haven't heard you today.
Yes.
What do you think? What do you think is the meaning of holistic? Holistic.
As a whole.
Very good. And by the way, not whole as in HOLE, but whole as in WHOLE.
Yes.
As a whole, okay? So if you want to, I guess what this is saying is if you have a holistic model, is you're not just looking at one aspect and you know you're not just looking at efficiency, you're not just looking at effectivity, you're not just looking at your shareholders and owners, you're looking at stakeholders, etc. And if you're doing that, then you have a holistic model. It takes a snapshot of the whole firm. And there are three broad approaches. First is what the financial results, which is cash flow, return on investment, etc. Second is the stakeholder satisfaction, which includes your employees and your customers, right? And this is where balanced scorecard comes in. And thirdly, and this is interesting because Anya talked about popularity a while ago. So popularity, I guess, is the same, very similar to admiration, isn't it? Admiration. So if people are saying, wow, we admire this company, then we're saying that that's probably a good measure of success. Now, personally, I'm not that fond of admiration. I mean, I don't think that should be a goal. It's good to be admired, but I'm not sure if that's a proper, target or objective or goal for a company to be running after. Because if that were the case, then I would just be paying a lot of marketers and PR professionals to sort of make my company look really good and really admired. By the way, I just realized something. Remember Theranos? Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos? Well, once upon a time, she was one of the most admired CEOs in Silicon Valley. And it was because of this admiration that her company went up to $1 billion in valuation. So they valued the company to be worth $1 billion. So you could argue that, yeah, she was able to achieve admiration, but it was a very short-term success because after a while they found out that she was lying. And from $1 billion, her company became zero, literally zero in value. So I'm not sure if I agree with the author here. But I think the whole point is that you don't just look at one set of measures. So again, looking at your assignment, when you're evaluating the strategies of the client firm, make sure you're looking at not just the financial results of the strategy, but also whether it has contributed in some way, one form or another, to the stakeholder satisfaction. So in fact, the balance scorecard here uses 4 measures. And these 4 measures are related to the stakeholders. So the financial perspective is really to satisfy the shareholders or the owners' expectations. The customer perspective, how satisfied customers are, as I said, this is more of a lead indicator, which gives us an idea of what's going to happen in the future, and could be seen as a stakeholder perspective as well, looking at customers and how well we are helping society, you could argue. If we're helping our customers, in a way, you are helping society. Third is learning and growth, and this is more about the employee perspective. Are they learning on the job? Are they growing? Growing means not just in height, but also in knowledge. Is their knowledge growing? And are they innovating? That's the ultimate measure. So if your employees are innovating and coming out with new things, that means they're growing. Okay? And then lastly, their processes. And you can argue that this is like the competence and capabilities of a firm, and how well are they in producing a product, in coming up with quality measures, and in coming up with better quality for their products. Then that is an internal business process. So for example, GE is known for its Six Sigma approach to quality. So this is an excellent business process. And you can argue that in this perspective, they're doing extremely well. But unfortunately, GE now has some problems with its financial performance because of some strategic moves that it's made in the past that made them fail, basically. So who's doing GE in this group? On, guys, who's doing GE? Heshna. Okay, good. So
Yeah.
I gave you a tip there, Heshna. So when you research GE, you will see that they're actually been bumped off the top 500 firms. Their value has gone down, dramatically. They lost about 40% of their value. They were hit hard by the financial crisis in 2009, and they haven't really recovered from that. So, however, you could argue that they're still successful and they have a lot of potential in the future because of, again, of their internal business processes. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so here's another way of looking at this, very similar to the balanced scorecard, but this time it uses the EVR congruence model that we discussed way back in session or week 1. Remember, EVR is the environment, the values, and the resources of the firm, and you can evaluate. The environment is basically your opportunities and your threats, if you remember, right? The values and the resources would be the strengths and weaknesses of the firm. So if they have a really good cultural or organizational culture which promotes innovation, you can be confident. For example, Dyson is so innovative. We can argue that that's a really good value to have, and it's a strength of that firm. And resources, that can include the money that's in their bank. That can include what do you call this? Their current operations. So knowing that if you have a cash cow, for example, you can use the money from the cash cow to help you grow. So remember, the BCG model is very much related to this. So basically EVR model, this shows us we can view the firm using these 3 aspects. And when we are measuring success, we look at the effectiveness measures, which is things like your market share, your customer satisfaction, which is part of the environment, the external part of the company. But we're also looking at the values of the company, the employee commitment and satisfaction, its ethics and social responsibility, its willingness to learn, and its innovation. That is effective. These are effectiveness measures. And then we look at efficiency measures, which includes how productive are they, how reliable are they, are their products known to have good quality. So for example, GE's products are supposed to be, when you look at the medical industry, they're very good quality. So you could argue that in terms of efficiency, they're very efficient. Okay, that's it.